Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Week in Sports Cars. With apologies for the slight delay, we're speaking to you from, well, a glittering hotel room in the 26th floor of a slightly anonymous hotel in Shanghai, because it's the FIWC is back on the road, and because of the unique way in which the internet works in China, or doesn't, that means that we're unable to get a kind of stable line in to my partner in crime and grime, Marshall Pruett. So it's going to be me joined once again by my partner in DSC and Race.com crimes, Stephen Kilbey. Stephen, good evening.
Good evening, Graham. I'm sorry for the downgrade.
Yeah, I think you should be too. Before we get into the questions, of course, we should say, of course, as we always do, thank you very much indeed to our good friends at Cooper Tyres and to the fine people of the Justice Brothers for their continued support for the Week in Sports Cars and all the other good things brought to you by the Marshall Pruett podcast. But this show is all about your questions about IMSA, about the world of ACO racing, and about just about anything else that crosses your mind to do with endurance and sports car racing. And, well, Stephen, you're going to act as Inquisitor, the Grand Inquisitor, the very Grand Inquisitor. Start asking those questions.
Yeah, let's start off with the IMSA section. We've got TF100B saying, with Kyle Busch running in an AVS Lexus at the Daytona 24 Hours next year, do you think his fan base will show a real interest in IMSA, and do you think they'll do something like live stream from the AVS cars because of his popularity during the race?
I'm sure they'll work very hard to unlock the potential fan base there. Quite whether or not we're going to see hundreds of thousands of people turning up, yee-hawing their way up and down the interstate, I don't know, is the honest answer. We have seen some big fan bases follow, some big names from NASCAR, from IndyCar, Formula One for that matter, to the Rolex 24 Hours. It's one of my favourite parts of that event. It is one of those, it's kind of all-star event, isn't it? I know you've been along with me for a number of years now, Stephen. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I remember when Jeff Gordon raced with Wayne Taylor Racing, walking around the campsites in the infield and certainly seeing some Jeff Gordon flags. The big NASCAR stars are a big deal in that part of the world. They really are. They are household names for a lot of people in South America particularly. Do
you think Jeff went out and gave those flags out?
He might have done, but you
hadn't thought of that, had you?
No, to be fair, I hadn't. Was it Dale Earnhardt or Dale Earnhart Jr. drove for Corvette? Was that the Rolex 24?
They did the Rolex 24, nearly won.
And did you go?
No, it was a little. There was the year before I first went, but I'm sure that was chock full of Intimidator fans. But it's it is definitely one of the unique parts of that event.
And it's the only weekend where there isn't a NASCAR race in the year.
A NASCAR race, or people recovering from a NASCAR race. But, I hope they do. I think people are smart enough that if you can invest in putting one of your hot properties in a race car, there's usually a reason beyond just their pace if they've got a name as well. Quite whether or not we'll see live streaming, that comes down to actually what they're allowed to do, of course. If they're going to do that, they're going to have to pay the bill for it, because the rights holders are elsewhere. But I'm sure we will be hearing more.
Next up is Iced Coffee. It says, for me, the car count is a major factor in the entertainment value of the Rolex 24 Hours, the Sebring 12 Hours and Petit Le Mans. And with car counts looking like they're going to be lower than in the past next year, what would you say I should be trying to look forward to get excited about the next IMSA season?
Sebring. No, I think the answer is I do expect we're going to see car counts down probably throughout the season. Some good news. I think some more good news to come about LMP2, for instance. But there's no denying it. We're going to have a bit of a reshuffle in the Daytona prototype international category, but certainly I think numbers are going to be a little bit down for the full season. GTLM we know is going to be down for the full season. GTD we don't really know yet. There's some movements I think still to come. It is, however, undoubtedly the fourth category without a shadow of a doubt. People would argue about maybe LMP2 being seen in that way, but GTD, reason for concern, certainly towards the end of the year, and with a number of teams still yet to kind of make it clear what they're going to be doing. I think we're going to be seeing more teams actually declaring, some returning teams without a shadow of a doubt. Whether or not we'll see any outcome from SRO's decision, it won't be a huge number of cars, but it doesn't take a huge number to make a bit of a news story. Whether or not we'll see some people moving over from Blancpain, World, America, Challenge,
whatever they're calling it this week, series,
Pirelli, thing. Whether we'll see that either for one-offs, two-offs, four-offs, or indeed full-season offs, we'll wait and see. But what should you be looking for? Close competition. That's the reality. The reality is that we all moan and groan, and I'm amongst them. When you lose a big team or two big teams, but look for the close competition. Look for where IMSA, I hope next year, get it right, where frankly this last 12 months they've got it wrong, and that was balanced performance. I think they've given themselves a bit of a talking to about that, and I think what you're going to see are classes that are pretty closely competitive, and that for me can overcome some of the short-term concerns about car count.
I think there's two things to be excited about. One is the Corvette CL. It's a new Corvette year. Doesn't happen very often.
Doesn't.
And there's going to be plenty of people looking to see what that's like. And two is I think Mazda's going to be more competitive at the big races like Sebring and Daytona. They've broken their duck at the moment. They've got some wins. Daytona hasn't been kind to them, and they're going to keep their eye on making sure that they can do well in that one.
We'll see. I hope so, because it's an effort that we know deserves to see some success, but there's big competition out there, and the caddies have always proved to be a bit of a juggernaut of the long races.
Next up is Blueby Job. He says,
good name.
There's lots of talk about different series combining for a double header weekend, i.e. IndyCar and NASCAR. What about IMSA and TransAm? I think it would be great, especially for the TransAm series. They're not in competing sports car series like IMSA and SRO are. It's pie in the sky, but I think a combined GT race at VIR with IMSA and TransAm on track at the same time would be carnage, and it would be awesome.
I think it would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? It very much is the kind of more old school American sports car racing, the kind of tube frame, big banger cars, and there's a lot to like about that. I know in the conversations we've had on the show before with Marshall, he's still got an awful lot of goodwill towards that. I'm looking forward to actually seeing Chris Dyson at Bahrain in December to find out his perspective on TransAm as someone still competing for the championship this year, and that monster Mustang he's got. Yeah, why not, is I think a straight and honest answer. It wasn't all that long ago when we used to have, effectively, World Challenge on the Sebring, bill, and I always look forward to those races. Always look forward to whether or not it was the bonkers, Volvos, or whether or not it was the early Cadillacs that I always looked like they were kind of mid-drive-by shooting. There's all sorts of things to look forward to. I think whenever you get the gathering of the clans, it's usually a good thing. And maybe if you'd asked me to kind of wave my magic wand over motorsport, I'd like to see a bit more of that. Whether or not it's someone like TransAm that's not got, a major kind of business clash with IMSA or with anybody else, or whether it's those that do. I'm a firm believer that, we talked a lot about the Indianapolis race, and I know we're going to talk about Indianapolis a little later in the show. For the Intercontinental GT Challenge, the SRO product, that doesn't work. There's precious few places that Stefan Mattel can take that in North America. My view is, if it doesn't work, he really needs to sit down with IMSA and see whether or not there's actually a deal to be done about a double header there. Lots of people had a real downer on Sebring about IMSA and the WEC, and it's fair to say that was nothing other than unmitigated triumph.
I must admit, I've never actually seen a TransAm race on TV or in person. Have you been to one?
I've not been. Actually, I have seen a TransAm race. Saw one at Road Atlanta one year.
Are they cool?
Oh, they're way cool.
Yeah, I bet they're loud, really loud.
No, they're whisper quiet.
So it's sort of like electric.
Yeah,
is that what
it's
it
like
is?
Formula E.
It's like Formula E. Formula Extreme.
Imagine Formula E with 42 heavy metal bands going round on 200-mile-an-hour trucks, and that's about it.
That sounds great.
Yes.
Let's move on with a question from Stephen Oliffe. He says, who gets on the phone with the captain first regarding bringing sports cars back to Indy? Is it IMSA or the WC? And who is Roger more likely to reply to first? Well,
WC, of course, have had a look at it before now. I think there's a bit of a difference of opinion as to who should be paying who to go there. But North America at the moment, it's probably not at the top of their agenda, because they've now got something they believe, and I think they're right, can be a longer term success at Sebring. Let's wait and see what comes out of the wash for year 2, that difficult second album. But who gets on the phone to them? Well, maybe IMSA will take a look at it. Maybe they'll take a look at it.
Not that long ago, IMSA last raced at Indy.
Was it IMSA?
Was it DP specs? Did they race?
Did they?
With like the Corvette DPs?
Did they?
I mean, I just have a recollection of it being not that long ago. Okay, maybe it was a bit longer than I can remember.
But no, I think the answer is it's going to be interesting to see what his priorities are. And again, I know we're going to be talking about IMSA and potential 24-hour races, etc. And
actually, in the next question,
there you go. Well, let's ask that next question and roll it in then.
Yeah, Mike Hogg says. Marshall, well, unfortunately he's not here. Says with Penske's wish,
not here.
But he's definitely not here. Is Penske's wish for a 24-hour race at the Brickyard aimed at IMSA or some other brand of sports cars?
I don't really care. I mean, whether or not it's Kravontic, whether or not it's IGTC making a bid for maybe a North American race there. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's an awful lot. A lot of things about Roger Penske. He doesn't tend to make many wrong moves in business, and I think if they do make a move in that direction, he'll have done his sums. He'll have understood, the whys, the wherefores, the maybes, and he won't be spending a lot of his own money doing it. So I think the answer is, if you do see a 24-hour race prospect coming for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, is likely to have understood where the pros, cons, the risks, and whether or not this is going to be a short or medium term risk at that. So look, it'd be great to see it. I like 24-hour racing. It'd be great to see it. It doesn't necessarily, of course, have to be something where the captain's expecting 80, 100, 150,000 people to come. Nothing wrong with Participation Motorsport, and he's now got a property that is a massive, massive draw for perhaps some of the smaller sanctioning bodies.
I'm sure once this podcast goes out, we'll have already seen a podcast on from Marshall Pruett on IndyCar answering questions about Penske's huge seismic deal that gets him in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and IndyCar and IMS Productions. But what's your 10 cents on the ground? Do you think it can only be positive, right?
Look, for my money, if you've got someone who's prepared to invest in a major motorsport venue, the properties that go with that venue, with cards in the game in the racing that takes place there, I think have to go a long way to not saying that's potentially a good thing for the future of the sports with, well, let's face it, an internationally renowned venue. It is, the Indy 500 is one of arguably the most famous race event in the world. There are very, very few that come even remotely close to it. And for the likes of Roger Penske, whether or not he's your cup of tea or is not, the reality is he's got heritage in this crazy business of motorsports for almost the whole of his professional life.
His heart's in the right place, this one, isn't it?
It's just got the top of his chest on the left-hand side.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
But look, I'd rather it was that than a Johnny-come-lately with a brave idea about blah, 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 branding, blah, 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 return on investment, blah, 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 floppy head, blah, 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 social media, blah, 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 influences. He's a more traditional businessman. And I think in this day and age, the fewer risks, the better here. If you're going to invest in a property that's actually got potential to pay you back. I'm delighted Penske's involved in it. It would be interesting to find out who else might have been at some point. But the proof of the pudding will indeed be in the eating of that said pudding. And I cannot see him making a failure at this.
Quick fire question. 10 years' time, what do you think will be the most positive deal or big change? Liberty taking over F1 or Penske taking over IndyCar?
Liberty giving up F1 and handing it over to somebody else. Now, I think the answer is Liberty have got some major challenges ahead in terms of the future business structure of Formula One. That's still to come. There's big challenges that are as yet unpublicised, and I'm not saying unknown, they're pretty well widely known. With Roger Penske, I can't see that being anything other than a really positive turn for them. Liberty, I think, have made some positive changes, but they've got bigger challenges ahead than Roger's got with IMS.
They've had to dig themselves out a bit more holes. I think
they have, and lots more to come to do.
Dennis Sozek says, the Michelin Encore at Sebring, there's only 18 entries this year. Is this event really necessary going forward? Aren't most teams getting ready for the upcoming season and therefore not having the time and finances to compete in a non-points race?
Look, opportunity to test, never a bad thing. If you want to add some competition onto that, a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of OEM, in this case Michelin sparkle, to some of the teams that maybe wouldn't get as much publicity on a regular IMSA weekend. I've no particular problem with that. but let's not make it something that it's not. It's not going to be a very top-line IMSA event. What it's going to be is an opportunity for testing. It's going to be an opportunity for a little bit of branding and a little bit of peripheral and additional publicity for everybody involved. Nothing wrong with that. We will come on, I know, later in the show to talk about at least one other event that I regard in the same kind of vein. You've heard me before on the show talk about the difference between promotable motorsports and participation motorsport. This is somewhere in between. There's a particular purpose for the brand, but it's not going to be something that's going to have, the race organisers for the Sebring 12 Hours or the Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona sweating under the collar, getting hot under the collar about the glamour of their event being undermined. Nothing wrong with it. Can't get that excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't always expect there to be huge numbers of cars turning up somewhere like this, but there's always value in track time at a place like
Absolutely.
Sebring.
Good luck to the ones who go. Hope it goes well. Hope you have a safe weekend.
We're moving on to WEC, Elms, Aslams and Acco.
Wow.
Yeah, here we go. We're going to start with Sad Boys 2, who's decided to ask the longest question of all time. Are you ready for the longest question of all time, Graham?
I hope so. Remember, we're in China, so the airtime is very, very, very expensive.
Yeah. Once upon a time, he starts with.
That doesn't sound good.
So, in last week's podcast, there was discussion of a vote to be held to choose the name of Hypercar. Is it not going to be called Hypercar? This is the first time I've heard of this, so more info would be much appreciated. Also, I've not been too into American sports cars until this last year, having mostly been into the WC for the last decade or so. I was under the impression that there was somewhat acrimonious relationships between the American sports car series and the FIA and ACO, and it always seemed to me like it was due to the European side of things being too unwilling to budge from their own position when it came to trying to work together. Is this accurate? If so, where does this play hard to get come from? It seems to me like if two series want to run their cars side by side and together, especially when discussing future formulas, it shouldn't be that difficult, although it took DTM and Super GT something like a decade to do this.
Is that the end, or is there more?
No, that's only the start. Do you want the rest?
No. So, okay. Was there acrimony? Yes. Has there been constructive discussion before and after? Yes. What were the reasons behind it? I think unhealthy doses of unrealistic and unenlightened self-interest on the part of a number of individuals. And no, I don't believe it was just on one side of the debate. The reality is, it is always difficult when you've got a well-established product, when you've got two partners, as IMSA and ACO/LMEM are in a number of regards, when it comes down to giving up a little bit of influence, giving up a little bit of positive when your partner's on a bit of a negative. And that takes, I think, brave people to put the potential gains aside. But I think that's exactly where we are now. I think where we are now is, I think that more people than before recognise that at the top end of the debate there are really very difficult moments, very difficult decisions to be taken, and at some point we've got to hope that the people at the top of the shop, and I'm looking at you, John Doonan, and the team at IMSA, and I'm looking at you, Pierre Fillon and Gerard Neveu, and the people at the top of the ACO and LMEM who run the WEC, to put aside a potential minor percentage gain in some regards, to give a little and to work together to find bigger percentage gains in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. Better times are coming for the top classes of both championships. WEC, we're not quite at a low ebb in terms of LMP1, but it's not doing remarkably well in terms of numbers. We've got Hypercar to come. My reckoning at the moment, if everything we think we know is around, we're going to be roughly, in terms of the numbers of hypercars in year one, at some point in year one, that we are currently going to see in DPI in 2020. So just under or around double figures. Same applies for IMSA. It is not a straightforward position at the moment with IMSA. We know that there are new manufacturers looking to come, but we shouldn't assume that the current manufacturers are all going to stay. And there are difficult decisions to be made there too. There are potential gains and potential losses from the choices that are made. It is a time for bravery and professionalism. That professionalism has got to show itself in looking not for the short-term gain, but for the potential that might come midway through and towards the end of a real cycle, and by thinking where we might be at the outturn of that real cycle and whether or not we've got another chance to get it right.
Let's not forget, when we're discussing things like relationships between America and global sanctioning bodies, that it's not just their priorities that can be sticking points. It can also be manufacturers and teams that race on either side. I mean, the difference in what an American manufacturer or an American-based representative of a manufacturer wants out of a championship and wants out of a rule set to somebody who wants to go and sell cars globally.
Well, that's the point, you see. At the moment, where the difficulty is you've got the ACO WEC. It's a global championship. Therefore, you're looking at budgets being garnered from not just an OEM in its home marketplace, let's say Germany for BMW, for instance, but trying to activate that across a global network of importers. That's a bigger task to get that right than it would be for DPI, for instance, where you're dealing with manufacturers, importers, the OEMs, in a single, albeit massive, continental marketplace. Where it's now getting sticky is when you get to the likes of Ford. We've heard McLaren too. That's a slightly different scale, of course, but that they're now looking to see whether or not there's an opportunity to leverage the influence they've got in bringing a new program or not, to leverage the potential to get something on a global scale. It's an incredibly difficult thing to achieve. We've said it before, we'll keep saying it. It does appear that we're getting to a kind of high water mark again at the moment in terms of the positivity of those discussions and its potential. We just need to be patient and wait and see how the outturn comes.
Before we move on, Sab was to also mention that he really hoped that at some point you'd hear from me again on the podcast. Your prayers have been answered, mate. I'm back. I'm better than ever. Marshall should not necessarily be worried, but all I'm saying, Graham, is there is a fan base building for me. You never thought you'd say that, did you?
I never thought I'd hear it. A fan base, the Stephen Kilbey fan club.
Of one, but there is one.
There's one, okay. So
how many fans do you need for a club?
There's only one to hold the club. But we'll obviously be offering a wide range of potential merchandise for Stephen Kilbey on the Week in Sports Cars, and I'll be getting onto that at some point in the next decade.
Well, yeah, exactly. That is going to bring in the big bucks. Grim Brother 1 has decided to not go with the longest question ever, but with the most questions ever. He's asked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 questions. So I think that's not all of them.
I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. You've missed. Was there a sixth?
There was a sixth.
You're not as good at this as Eduardo Freitas is, are you?
I can't count.
No.
I can't read, I can't count.
Go for it in a fairly rapid-fire order.
His first question is, I feel like the champion Audis, Golf Racing, and Orica Peugeots are some of the last true factory customer programs, more akin to what we saw in the 956, 962 era. Do you think that a large part of this waning scenario is the natural byproduct of the increased technology and investment?
Yes and no. I don't think you're right. We've got DPI, of course. We have got a number of customer cars in a top level of sports cars. That can't and shouldn't be ignored. Don't forget either the investment that the privateers have to make in customer GTE programs in the WEC. There's lots of those. Frankly, not a very much different level than you might have been looking at for an LMP1 not that long ago. And the final thing to say is there's a new era of this coming. Remember, we already know there's going to be customer hypercars for the Valkyrie, the Aston Martin Valkyrie with R Motorsport. So not quite dead. Get your points, certainly. It'd be an interesting... I think the other thing as well is lots of large-ish professional motorsport organisations have now got, certainly in the global regard, and also in the European side of the continental divide as well, have got the opportunity to do LMP2 and have some remarkably good runs there, and with a customer base that doesn't necessarily rely on having to find the sponsorship. In an era where you've got a widespread Pro-Am formula, the market has changed, and I think that's the biggest thing. Pro-Am has absolutely changed the marketplace in top-level sports car racing.
How feasible do you think it might be for Toyota to catch Ferrari or Audi in the total Le Mans 24-hour wins?
It'll take commitment beyond the next stage, won't it? So 2 at the moment. We've got the hypercars still to come, of course. That's probably a 3 to 5 year cycle before we get into zero emissions. And then you get into zero emissions. If that goes the way that the ACO are hoping it's going to go, then you know what? We've seen manufacturers come through a new rules cycle, new technology cycles, and dominate. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. There is one record which I think is beginning to look as if it's inevitably going to go, and that's the tyre manufacturer winning at Le Mans with Hypercar going the way of Michelin. That's a bit of a gift to them. It was already a bit of an open goal because, of course, Dunlop currently hold that record. Dunlop will be no more next year, certainly for the time being at the Le Mans 24 Hours. And it doesn't look as if Goodyear are going to be in a position to have a good year at Le Mans for the foreseeable future.
Unless a P2 wins overall.
Unless a P2 wins overall, and they've got that contract. So that's the one I think that is most likely to go. It's Michelin and the tyre manufacturer. But Toyota, they've got, they've got to win it next year. For starters, you've then got Hypercar. You've then got to see what they come up with in a zero emissions era.
When might we see a serious Chinese OEM effort at the Le Mans 24 Hours? Now, I asked this question to David Cheng at the prologue last year, and he said he was working on it. I haven't heard anything since then about any progress to that, but I think at some point, surely got to see a big Asian manufacturer like Hyundai or some of the Chinese ones like, I don't know, who's big?
Buy Your Dreams.
Yeah, Buy Your Dreams. P1 program?
Don't think so. A bit gaudy, probably.
Roveway.
Roveway, why not the Rover? Rover and P1, dear me. The reality is, it's. I'm old enough, yes, I'm that old, to remember when an awful lot of traditionalists in Europe laughed at Japanese manufacturers, and they did. This was the one that the bloke down your road that had the job that required a night shift bought himself a little Datsun 120Y because that got him to and from his job reliably without the car breaking down on him in the wet or cold weather. No one's laughing now, I think, is the answer there. So the answer is, the inevitability is that I think you're going to see some emerging forces in it. We've already seen some niche manufacturers have a bit of a crack at International Motorsport. Alpine's one of the more recent ones, Auris as well. Yes, they are branding exercises, but they're there, and there's activation coming on. I know you've been working this week on some stuff about Auris and about where that actually might take things. So the answer, I think, is: am I aware of anything immediately? No. Do I think we're likely to see something from Southeast Asia that we've not so far seen at the top level? Yeah, I do. I think we might see South Korea first. But I don't believe we're going to see China too far behind. There's we're here in People's Republic of China. There's a huge amount of pride and ambition here. Now, you've been coming here for how many years?
This is my third or fourth.
Okay, and you tell me, how many changes have you seen in 3 years?
Enormous change, from the cars people drive to the amount of buildings to the level of buildings.
Yep. And for that matter, to the standard of the road cars we're seeing. And that's domestic production as well as the imports, or by imports, they're almost all actually built here, apart from the really, really top-end stuff. But the reality is there is no shortage of ambition. Has that been delayed by a bit of an economic slowdown here? Yes. But make no mistake, China knows that if they're going to be truly successful economically, that means they've got to be operating on a wholly different scale than just even this enormous marketplace. And that requires standing out. And traditionally, that's been more easy to achieve through marketing and competition. So let's wait and see.
One of the best examples of the way things are developing over here, I think, came from you told me the first time I came here, which was when we were standing in the media centre looking out of the panoramic view of the circuit. And you said the first time we came here, the massive skyline wasn't there.
It wasn't. It was a long way away. And now it's almost at the
you
track.
You can't see anything.
You can't.
So, as far as I can see, it's
skyscrapers. Skyscrapers. It's tall, high-rise buildings, mainly for people living here. In what is the part of Shanghai we're in is the part of Shanghai where most of the major automotive plants are, and they are enormous. Absolutely enormous. Enormous on a terrifying scale for some traditional Western manufacturers. And once that economic power starts to shift its focus in a different direction into niche marketplaces, that's a point at which people should start to worry. But I tell you right now, if you're sitting there and listening to this and thinking Chinese manufacturers, don't laugh, because trust me, when that starts to move in a direction of performance and endurance, there's going to be something pretty big and pretty special.
Let's say Glickenhaus wins Le Mans with an Alfa-engined hypercar. Would that add to Alfa Romeo's Le Mans total or not, because it's just an engine supplier? Would it be not too dissimilar to the Porsche wins of 96 and 97?
It's an odd one, because in some instances you'll hear the TWR WSC 95s and 96, 97 cars mentioned as Porsches. You seldom hear the McLaren mentioned as a BMW from 95. So it's going to be an interesting one to see how history records it. My view is it's a Glickenhaus. It's as simple as that. Chassis first. It's a Glickenhaus. So it'll be badged as a Glickenhaus. It may be eventually badged as a Glickenhaus Alfa Romeo, if indeed that all comes together and happens in that way, as I believe that Jim Glickenhaus intends it to. But if that car comes out and is looking very competitive indeed, if I was an Alfa Romeo marketeer, I think I'd be on the phone to Jim and Jesse and having a bit of a debate about what we might do at the end of that year when the car races for the first time at Le Mans 24 Hours.
I've been going back and rewatching older iterations of the Le Mans 24 Hours and pondering the difference between how the selection process used to be with what we have now with invitations as opposed to pre-qualification requirements, more earned auto entries rather than more earned auto entries right now. Do you have a preference now versus then in how the cars are selected for the big race, in variety versus quality?
I've always loved the variety. It's what attracted me to Le Mans in the first place. I happen to think that the auto entries process is pretty okay. You've got to look at it this way. How many of the teams that have earned an auto entry wouldn't be going anyway? And it's a very small number, really. You are talking about teams that are earning their opportunities by operating at a very, very high level. You have to look really at the kind of the Pro-Am or the Am winners to see the areas where people get into that debate. But the reality is those auto entries are pre-publicised very early. To a degree, everybody's got the same opportunities. I would like to see an opportunity when it comes down to the push and shove of who are going to make up the last few, to maybe see a little bit of competitive edge to it. Maybe there's a way in which you could actually have something at the test day that you can earn there. Maybe not ultimately a place, but something within that placing system. I'd like to see a competitive element back into it. Some of the stories, of what was happening in the pre-qualification days were legion. Andy Wallace and the rapidly failing Panars managing to get through with a cough and a splutter across the line and knocking out other cars. The history doesn't necessarily recall the ones that didn't make it. It remembers the heroes that did. And test day of late, for me, it's been a bit of a damp squib, I'll be honest with you. And I'd like to see something within test day for those teams to achieve. Go away with a bit of a headline. I'm not quite sure what. I'm not quite sure whether or not that means some kind of preference in running order or whatever that might be, but I'd like to see something coming out for test day to have an element of competition at the very least.
Here's an idea, okay? This is me riffing. At test day, instead of having 2 Road to Le Mans races in Le Mans week, you have 1. The other Road to Le Mans race happens on the test day with all the cars in P3 from Le Mans Cup, and because Le Mans Cup don't get an automatic entry in LMP3 for winning the championship, you do a race at Le Mans on the test day. The winner of that race gets to come back for Le Mans with a car that's already pre-prepared, arrive and drive in P2.
What, like a Ligier P2?
Yeah.
Oh,
that's quite cool, right?
I'd quite like that. I think that's quite a neat one. So if you like Stephen's idea, send your postcards to Pierre Fillon, care of the Circuit du 24 Quatre and put on there, Stephen told me to do this.
GT1. Will we ever see a proper GT1 class again? While the cars like the Aston Martin Vulcan, the Pagani Zonda or the McLaren P1/Senna GTR certainly fit into the spirit of the class name, it seems what a waste and a shame not to see them race properly in anger versus what SRO is talking about with implementing them in the near future of more like a mobile auto show than real motorsport.
I think the problem is that you're talking about private money. I think actually success or otherwise of Hypercar will indicate whether or not there's any potential for that at all, because that is going to be a factory funded, effectively that kind of level of technology. They can make a success of it. If, in year 2 you suddenly find that we're, got an embarrassment of riches, then maybe. But, it does seem as if the time has gone for those fantastic cars. And they were the cars that, first lit my sports car fire without a shadow of a doubt. But once technology started to get rolling and then the OEMs got their dander up and the opportunities became, it killed it in a year or two. It killed it stone dead. The arms race became, a critical mass very, very quickly. I hope not. I hope there's a place for them. We have seen, of course, Aston Martin Vulcans racing, and we've seen them racing at Le Mans, for that matter, in the support races, and maybe that's where you might want to be looking at things in the future, is in some way something that's maybe less serious, maybe less of the titanic season-long budgets, and maybe a race for some of the specials once or twice a year, and I'd be delighted to see those kind of cars running around the circuit at Le Mans, as they probably should be, but the reality is very few people can afford to run them.
Moving on to Hieronymus now. He says, cheers. Cheers to you.
What have we done now?
Is there any news regarding the appeal of Inter-Europol for the last race of the ELN Match Championship? I think you should probably explain exactly what he's talking about there before we go any further.
We should. So this is Inter-Europol, who, across the line at the end of the final race of the European Le Mans Series, won the championship, and indeed the automatic entry to Le Mans in LMP2 that went with that. Post-race, though, there's something of a disagreement between the stewards of the meeting and the team about the interpretation of driver time that resulted from a near 1 hour delay under red flag. The race organisers were pretty clear that they felt they'd been clear. Inter-Europol believed that the basic regulations have missed a major trick. They think they're right. They think that an interpretation about what driver time should have been done by Martin Hipper, their silver ranked driver, is incorrect, and they are prepared to try their hand effectively in the motorsport courts. So the answer is, when will we find out? Well, before February, because that's when that question of the automatic entry will need to be finally decided. Either way, there's going to be a disappointed team. It's either going to be into Europol or it's going to be Euro International.
There was a lot of confusion in that red flag at Portimao.
There was, and I think it's fair to say that the document that made its way to the teams, frankly, could have been better. It was sent to me in the commentary booth, and I was struggling with it. Let's wait and see. I've listened to both sides. I've had a lot of people tell me it was very clear what it was meant to say. There's a difference between what it was meant to say and what it actually said, and there's also a difference in interpretation between the source document that it relates to. We are not talking about a bunch of country bumpkins here. We're talking about a team that has won championships in LMP3. They know their stuff. They've got experienced engineers. They've got experienced people around the rule books, and they will have had a very solid reason for believing what they did. They were not the only ones to be confused by that note. Let's wait and see what emerges. Either way, it's regretful that a team, either that team or Euro International, that at some point will have believed that they won that championship, and the final analysis will have not have won it.
It wouldn't be an ELMS race without post-race penalty.
No.
Graham? No. He also asks about the WC this weekend, and this question's made a lot better by the fact that we've already seen some track action. He says, with the success handicaps being applied for the Toyotas here, do you think we'll see something resembling a close race in P1?
Possibly. Certainly for a time. In terms of pure lap speed, they're pretty close. But we have not seen a Toyota lead a session so far. We're recording this, in fact, very early on Saturday morning now. And the two sessions so far have been led by Rebellion and then by Ginetta, and they're quick. The real surprise to me, though, Stephen, is not just that we've got the closeness between the LMP1 Privateers and the LMP1 Hybrid. It's the speed of the quickest of the LMP2s, which are right up there, and in fact were quicker than a Toyota this morning.
Briefly, yeah. In FP1, there was indeed a P2 that finished. I think it was Nicola Lapierre in the Cool Racing Orica finished ahead of one of the Toyotas.
He did indeed. So I think there's potential there. Ultimately, in terms of the way the power delivery is actually done. You must apologise. My phone is ringing in the background. I'm just getting rid of it. In terms of the way in which the Toyotas deliver their power, we do think that when we get into kind of closer running with traffic, they do have an inherent advantage there. No doubt that this performance handicap that's been doled out to them is beginning to have a pretty serious effect. We'll wait and see. Do I think it's impossible for them to win? Of course it's not impossible for them to win. They have the most advanced, the quickest, and for that matter, by the look of it, the most reliable car. That's been an area where there's been real downsides to the privateers thus far. We'll wait and see. I'm looking forward to the potential for a little bit of, nip and tuck in the opening stage of this race at the very least. Let's hope so. That's what it's designed to do.
George Buda says, with possible technical gremlins for the new car/hypercars in the first few races of next season, do you think there's a possibility of the grandfathered private P1s to win some races or even fight for the championship?
Yes, and I think that's what the likes of Lawrence Tomlinson is certainly thinking about. I think that's absolutely where Lawrence is aiming for. He's underlined his commitment to the great race in June next year. I think he's made it very clear he's at the moment working towards potentially a third Ginetta for Le Mans, and he's certainly thinking very positively towards an entry into the WEC with a grandfathered version of the car that we've currently got. Quite what they'll do to grandfather it, whether or not it will be competitive with a new hypercar, I think is open to debate. But he's absolutely gambling on the fact that by then he'll have the reliability of the Ginetta AER as nailed down as he possibly can have it, and that will be a very strong suit against hypercars, which, let's be blunt, will be very, very new indeed. There has seldom been a rule cycle where we're going to have seen the proportion of the top class delivered to their race teams and delivered onto the track so close to the start of a competitive season, and in particular a competitive season where after the opening race of that season, if indeed it's still in Silverstone in Europe, they're going to be in a container and not able to be easily dealt with back at base.
Do you think this is going to resemble what we saw in 2012 with Audi and Toyota coming in with an effort that was perhaps a little bit more rushed than it should have been?
Well, we saw it with the final year of Audi, where they I don't want to use words like rushed and panicked, but certainly that was a car that needed a lot more development. The final year Audi, there's no doubt the pace, the potential in that car. It was an absolute rocket ship, but it wasn't what we'd expect by then to see from an Audi, which is a nailed down, reliable package. It simply wasn't, and that lost them that championship without a shadow of a doubt. I think we might see something similar, and it might well be something that we've got used to not seeing for a long time, which is a championship decided not just on pace but on reliability, and that's got some appeal. I'll be honest with you, it's got some appeal that we might start to see some real shockers coming out in the season, and particularly earlier on in the season.
I can't remember that far back, but when Toyota ran partially in the WC with one car, was that because they were spending time developing the other car and testing it?
The reality with the 2012 car was that came in, that was never supposed to be entered in 2012. That was the year that it was supposed to be Audi versus Peugeot, of course. Peugeot pulled out with just weeks before the start of a brand new World Championship, and Toyota were persuaded, and bless them for it, we've got short memories, haven't we, that car, which was never the race car, that was a development car, was going to step up and do as big a part of the World Championships as they could, and they ran every race from Le Mans onwards with the single car. So the reality was that was a car that was designed to test. It wasn't a car that was designed to race, and we saw that later in the year, for instance, at Bahrain, where the car, I think, had some contact, had a non-operational number panel, the eliminated number panel. It took them half an hour to change that side pod because it simply wasn't designed as a racing part. So the reality, I think, here is we're more likely than any other point to see a higher proportion of the top class of cars operating at something less than the optimum in terms of reliability.
James Hewitt says, we've heard of prospective customers coming forward for 3 of the 4 LMP3 constructors for 2020. Is there any news on the ground regarding customers for a desk?
Yeah, I've been a bit remiss post-Portimao with all sorts of other things going on of not putting together the pretty massive amount of work that you and I have both done on LMP3 and all 4 manufacturers and where they are. There are some pretty strong storylines emerging from there. Not all of them good. Ades were, I think, initially due to run at Portimao. They opted not to. They do have a test coming pretty soon. They are still looking for a customer for that car. I am not at the moment in a position where I can tell you exactly where that customer is going to come from, but I wish them the best.
Keep it locked to DSC because there's going to be some tasty P3 stories.
What would say, by the way, is we are going to see an Ades chassis, though, in the Michelin Le Mans Cup next year, because the H24 car, the hydrogen fuel car, is going to be running...
Which H24 car? There's 2 of them now.
Well, yeah, one homologated car. But that car will be running in the Michelin Le Mans Cup through next season. That is an Ades-based car.
James Muscat says, over the Portimao weekend, Graham, you mentioned that the new generation of P3 cars will have a more powerful engine.
They will.
Will this cause problems when the P2s get slowed down for the introduction of car? Will the 2 classes become too close in performance?
That's a question that a lot of people are asking, without a shadow of a doubt, and very many of those people asking those questions are people that actually run LMP2 teams. We've got a broad indication of what the potential pace for the new P3 cars are going to be. It's going to be significantly quicker than they currently are. We don't yet know exactly what we're going to see in terms of ELMS and the wick being turned down on the current P2 cars, but yes, there is active concern that might be an issue that begins to grow. It's certainly going to make an awful lot of the corners, an awful lot of the tracks, an awful lot more busy than they currently are.
Andre Beck 10 says, what happened to some of the older ELMS teams like Greaves Motorsport and Murphy Prototypes? They were around when I started watching, but I've not heard from them in a while.
Well, Greaves Motorsport still around. In fact, some of their personnel operates with a number of teams around the world. I mean, Jacob Greaves, for instance, and some of his closer colleagues, I think, are going to be out with the Asia Le Mans Series again. They were part of the LMP2 background team that won the title with ARC Bratislava last year. But Greaves, as a going concern, switched very particularly away from active motorsport and into the engineering side. So if you look up and down the WEC pit lane or the LMS pit lane nowadays, vast majority of the fueling rigs that you see are actually built by Greaves 3D Engineering. Lots more beside the little fuel Daleks that you see that are there to actually manage the pumping fuel in and out of the cars when the cars aren't running. They're Greaves products. Lots of other kind of fabricated, machined tools and parts as well from Greaves. Greg Murphy, not heard a lot from Greg. The last time I was aware that he was running a car was actually the Masters Historic race. The Orica 03R ran at least one of those races and did pretty well. But I haven't heard much from Greg. Would love to hear from him if you're listening in, Greg.
Here's a blast from the past. Last time I spoke to Greg Murphy, I was on the phone to him and he was testing the Arve Riley chassis.
Was he really?
There
you go.
Now that was a legendary car.
No, wasn't it just? Car singular.
Justin Trock 71 says, Graham, first, you can't answer, let's wait and see. You have to bet your life savings on this WC season. It's a simple bet. Does Toyota win every race this year? Yes or no? Remember, you can't say let's wait and see.
Yes, but they're not going to be 1-2 at every race.
Okay. I'll say let's wait and see then. James Counter, is there any car company quite like Glickenhaus out there? The closest I can think of is M Sport, who do rally and circuit stuff. Congratulations to Jim for being honoured by the US Chamber of Commerce as an Innovator of the Year. Who's most comparable to Glickenhaus? He's a unique
Innovator of the Year. Say again.
US Chamber of Commerce Innovator of the Year.
There's lots of innovators out there. They're not necessarily people with a badge on the front of the car. You need to look at some of the kind of the engineering companies in the background. I'll give you someone like Gibson, for instance, is a good example of somebody, a company. No, not him. But a good example of a company that's come up with a product that's there against a tender, and has produced something really pretty spectacular. It's 50 of those engines. It supplies by far the most successful near top class of prototypes we've seen in my memory. How many times have you seen a Gibson engine fail?
Very, very, if ever, really.
I think I've seen one ever, and that was I believe, an assembly issue. So I think the reality, is look beyond the headlines. Look to the smaller companies. Look to the companies supplying kind of support services. You know Chris from the Racing Optics team.
Yeah, that guy.
He's in every single pit lane.
He's the Jim Hersey of optics.
He is. He does. What Chris does is, amongst other things, he supplies pre-assembled screens for GT and LMP cars with the tear-offs. So I've often seen him taking full windscreens from LMP1 and LMP2 cars under his arm back to the car to take back to the workshop to bring back to the team the next time, because that's the windscreen they're going to use at insert name of massive race. Yeah, it is the small operators that have got these spectacular little businesses without which it could not happen.
Sean Crockett says, thinking about the likelihood of fuel cell motive power being allowed in the WC in Le Mans in 2024, is it likely to be in the top class? If so, I'd expect this to cause the ACR a bit of a headache.
The last conversation I had with Pietschmann was about this very point. He says they are looking at these cars as soon as possible, racing for an overall win. That's it. That's what they're looking to do. And the level of manufacture they're dealing with, it would be nothing else.
The progress is coming hugely, and when we were talking to the guys behind the H24 project, we were getting a bit of an idea of just how much is coming along, not just in things like developing the portable fuel station, but in the pace of it. That car is significantly quicker, the H24 car, than it was last year when we saw it at Spa, and they're expecting it to be at GT3 pace next year. And if it is at GT3 pace next year, that is 4, 5, 6 seconds a lap quicker. That is phenomenal. If it can go on a curve like that for an extended period of time, it won't be very long before we're seeing a car with that sort of powertrain deliver that level of performance.
It's that level of performance, and also they're also upping the ante in terms of how far it will go. So there's two things. One is the endurance of the powertrain, and the other one, you're quite right, Stephen, is the overall performance.
Tiger a 380, and we're moving into General.
Are we now?
Yes, we are. He's asking about this McLaren GT3 video that surfaced of it testing at Monza without the chicanes. It's gained a bit of traction because of the sound of the engine. I haven't watched this video because I've probably been lazy. You have, though. What can you tell us?
I know everything about it. It's not a race car. It's a straight answer. What you've got is a powertrain mule. It's clearly based on the 720S GT3. It is not a race car engine. It is for a very short run, very high performance road to race car for the kind of clip. But oddly enough, we've had a question about things like an Aston Martin Vulcan. It's of that ilk. It's something that McLaren have actually been activating very well over the last several years. This is another one. It will be a version of the 720S with a ridiculous amount of horsepower that is principally designed for the track. It's not a hypercar. It's not a GT2 car. It's not an upgraded GT3 car. It's not a GTE car. It's not a race car.
So it's not DPI 2.0?
No.
Okay. Just clearing that up, because somebody would ask. Sean Crockett says, who is the driver or any other team representative who's turned up for an interview in the worst condition possible following post-race celebrations? This could include morning after interviews.
Ooh. I know a few journalists have turned up rough, but
to the press room on the day of the Spa 24 Hours.
But yes, indeed. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. We can't talk about him because he's standing for election. Oh, I've given it away, Sam. Oh, sorry. I'm going to say it. Sam Collins, without a shadow of a doubt. Sam Collins from Race Car Engineering, as was, now standing for Parliament in our coming election. And
good luck to him.
Good luck to him.
Good luck to the guy.
Good luck to you, Sam. I hope you're listening in, but we are now going to embarrass you publicly. Did turn up to the Spa 24 Hours absolutely hammered.
Well, to be fair, the Spa 24 Hours, Graham.
You need to be hammered.
You would, wouldn't you?
Yep.
I'm going to give one story, and I'm not going to name the driver because it wouldn't be fair. But I was at the ELMS finale at Portimao 2 years ago, and I was doing a little bit of work for a team in the background, and within half an hour of the race finishing, said driver, who had just won the ELMS title in his respective class, by the time I got to him, had an entire bottle of vodka and was incomprehensible.
Yeah, we're not going to name that name. It wouldn't be fair.
No. Dan Summersgill says, this is a general question. Graham, what did you think of the FIA Motorsport Games? Me personally, or hashtag me personally, it seems like a reasonable concept, but I think it needs a rethink on location. Obviously, you were there at Vallelunga last weekend. You were in Rome, soaking it up, quite literally. What was it like?
Weather was really unfortunate. It hammered it down all weekend. The format did indeed have a lot to kind of like. I think it does need some thought. You've got two bodies of opinion within the organising group between the FIA and SRO who have a longish term contract to do this. I know Stefan Rattel is gung-ho, wants to expand, and many, many more disciplines, rallying, rallycross, dragsters, truck racing, endurance racing. He's talking to the ACO, historic racing he'd like to see added to it. My view of this is it does have potential to achieve some things. It is not and should not become something which is pro-based and is looking to go head-to-head with other big events. It provides a great opportunity for some of the smaller operations to come out. So there's some of the Pro-Am efforts, particularly from emerging motorsport markets. It was great to see. I think we had 50 or 51 nations represented. There were some of the contest. The karting slalom was a little bit downbeat, but you've got to find somewhere to come in with real grassroots, particularly with youngsters. And the boy-girl bit there, I think, worked pretty well for them. It was, one male contestant, one female contestant from each participating country. It needs some thought. Location is going to be interesting. I think it's odds on we're going to see it at Paul Ricard next if it gets the nod for next year. There's then a question about whether or not it's every year, every 2 years, every 4 years. I think edging towards every 2 years. And then what the format might be and what you might do in the intervening years for something of a fill-in. So I think it's got something. I think there will be a long, long list of wash-up questions as well as wash-out questions about Vallelunga. But you can't judge an event by one lot of poor weather, particularly when it's an event that is going to be moving from place to place to place. It does give an opportunity. It should not and cannot become something that just becomes a money-making opportunity.
Damien Pietschmann adds to this topic by saying, Marshall, that's me this week, and Graham, pick two things each that you'd both like to be added to the motorsport games. I'm going to do one serious and one ridiculous one. Shall we go first?
Go for it.
While you think about it. My serious one is, I think, something like Formula Student would be cool to be involved with that. If you had like a Formula Student race that was involved with some of the cars that they come up with, because there's some really cool stuff going on with,
and it's perfectly relevant as well.
Yeah, perfectly relevant. It would be really good publicity for some of the university project students who do some incredible work in finding their feet in motorsport. The ridiculous one is a bike race made entirely of people who've never raced a bike before. Wouldn't that be great?
Maybe not. For me, I think the addition of endurance racing is a good one. It's pretty clearly aimed towards something like LMP3, I think is what you're looking at there. That's the entry level, if you like, at the level at which I think it should be pitched at. And the other one, I think they're absolutely right, rallying. Without a shadow of a doubt, a special stage or a hill climb stage, I think, would be a great addition to it. It's got real potential to be an event that people follow. Through live streaming. That requires investment without a shadow of a doubt, and God bless him, Stefan Rattel and his organisation have invested pretty heavily in that product. I'm keen to see what comes out from the conversation after Vallelunga. The proof of the pudding for me is going to be how deeply they've questioned themselves about what went well and what went badly. What did they spend money on that frankly they didn't need? There was a fair bit of that. What didn't they spend money on that they could have done? Which of the disciplines proved to be a success? For instance, I think the F4 discipline there. Difficult in terms of the timing because people on their 4 ladder are obviously on the way up and will be testing other cars. But the principle of actually having found Paul Lipp, who's prepared to put his money where his mouth was and commit to a car that no one else has got experience of, so as none of those drivers came in with an advantage, which will only be used for the first 3 years of the Motorsport Games and for no other events. That, to me, it's a big commitment from KCMG to the Motorsport Games, but there was a bit of quiet genius behind that because those kids came in and no one had the upper hand. That, I thought, worked well. The touring car race worked pretty well. TCR is a great formula for this. GT is a great thing to have at these Motorsport Games, but driving standards were a bit iffy amongst 1 or 2 of them, and maybe what needs to actually happen with Motorsport Games as it progresses and you get more nations in is those qualifying races need to be make or break. If you ain't going to make the cut, you shouldn't be in it. It's as simple as that. So there's lots of good. There's some serious questions that need to be asked. For my money, my opinion is going to be developed for the future on the basis of how those questions are answered and what those answers are.
Do you think it lacked something like full fat works teams, factory drivers, or do you think it should be an event that's based around up and comers?
No, absolutely, definitely should not be a pro event. There's plenty enough events in the world for the pros to actually push on with.
Neil, we've got a second question from Damien Pietschmann. He says, outside of Macau, what would the best circuit be to host the GT World Cup meeting?
Any circuit. Any circuit. I think it's a terrible place to hold it. I don't get me wrong, I like the Macau meeting. I like it for the Formula 3. I like it for touring cars. It is an awful place for a GT3 race, particularly the current breed of GT3s, which are faster, bigger, aero-dependent. It's a terrible place for a GT3 race. And I'll be blunt, I think the GT event is a joke. It's in the wrong place, and it piggybacks an event because of the significance it's actually got. It's a unique track. It's a fabulous place for motorsport, but
still relevant for F3, I think.
Absolutely. I'd quite like to see the FI World Cup maybe held it as part of the event at the Bathurst, 12 hours. That's a driver's circuit if ever there was one. And let's face it, if it's going to be deemed a success to have 15, 16, 17 cars, and most of them manufacturer based, put a few more on the ship, boys, and let's have a separate race with the same form of cars. It doesn't need to be the ones you bring into the 12 hours, and let's see. But that would be, for me, that'd be an ideal place to do it.
We're going to go to fun and general. We're just going to go to fun because we've just done general. Apologies. Richard Cooper is going to start us off. He says, on which occasion do you think a racing driver has choked as badly as the England rugby team? I have no idea what he's talking about, Graham. Didn't we won the World Cup?
We won the World Cup,
summer, didn't we?
I think we did.
We did. We won the World Cup.
Was that cricket? I know we're really very good at sport.
I don't know World Cup.
We're really good at sport.
We are really good at sport.
We'll push on. That's
a really good. Motorsport Matty says, is there any hope of changes to the pit stop regulations for the Spa 24 hours in the near future? And this is the final question, Graham, so you can rant away. He says there's plans to bring in time pit stops at the Bathurst 12th hour were shelved after fan backlash. # me personally, I found the Spa 24 hours a bit dull due to the lack of interesting pit strategy.
I am not going to go through again my view of the Spa 24 hours. I will recommend no. I will recommend that you listen to Stefan Mattel's own response to those questions, because I did pose them to him during the Suzuka 10-hour race earlier this year, and actually that's the view that matters. It's not my view that matters. He's the guy whose event it is. I thought he gave a very clear answer. It helped me to understand why he's taken that view. I don't agree with all of it, but I agree with more of it than I did before. Have a listen to the interview with Stefan on the Marshall Pruett podcast. It was about 6 weeks ago, something like that. You'll find it on the archive without a shadow of a doubt. Have a listen to what he's got to say about it, then let me know what you think. That'll be it for this evening. We're now knocking on for 1 o'clock in the morning here, and
we've got to be up at 2 a.m.
Yeah, excellent.
to get to the circuit.
We do again.
Yeah.
But thanks to you, Stephen, for filling in the remarkably large shoes of Marshall Pruett. Thanks to all of you for sticking with this crazy weekly thing we do. Thanks, of course, to the Justice Brothers and to Cooper Tyres for their continued support for our efforts. This has been the Week in Sports Cars here in Shanghai. I've been Graham Goodwin. Good night.